International Business Machines, IBM, which this season has brought you Town Meetings of the World, CBS Reports, the National Health and Citizenship Tests. Tonight presents Broadcast 13 in this distinguished series.
This is not a crater on the moon. This is an IFO, Identified Flying Object. A man, not Superman, jetting in a Bell Aerosystems rocket belt. This is a UFO, Unidentified Flying Object, popularly called a flying saucer. To responsible scientists and photoanalysts, they are lenticular clouds, sundogs, planets, balloons, or mirages.
First of all, the objects are not unidentified. We know what they are. Second, in many cases, in most cases, they're not flying. And finally, in many cases, they are not even material objects.
A real flying saucer looks like this, an Avrocar manufactured in Canada, being test-flown in 1961. Or like this free-flying air-cushioned vehicle being flown by its inventor, Professor Paul Moeller, in 1965. But UFO sightings persist, and skeptics often become confirmed believers.
I've slowly come to the conclusion that there are such things as interplanetary spaceships. I'll have to stick my neck out and say that because I believe it at long last.
Psychiatrists often call these reported UFO sightings illusions, hallucinations, self-delusions.
I'm not saying that there aren't things in the sky that we don't know about. What I am saying is that when there's anything that one doesn't know about, then the mind fills it with a great mass of fantasy. And that most of what we're dealing with in these reports is almost certainly fantasy.
Almost before the fingers leave the keys. With this time-sharing system, an IBM computer is now available to anyone, anywhere.
CBS Reports, UFO, Friend, Foe, or Fantasy, continues with Walter Cronkite.
Much of science, when we look at it close up, looks like fiction. Those who charge a conspiracy as being carried on by scientists and the military to cover up visitations from outer space use that charge to explain why no UFOs have been reported by our space defense system. Well, this is a dangerous game, like yelling fire in a crowded theater. For in this hydrogen bomb and missile age, the Air Force has the job of turning the unidentified into identified objects in a matter of moments. There's no time for theory and conjecture, because any unidentified object would sound warning klaxons around the world. Thousands of people would have to know about it instantly. It's literally true that what we don't know could kill us. CBS News correspondent Bill Stout reports from Colorado Springs.
This is where they watch everything that flies over or close to North America. The Combat Operations Center for NORAD, the North American Air Defense Command. Thousands of items of information pour in here from radar stations, outposts, ships, and aircraft scattered all across the hemisphere. Data that's sorted and displayed on this screen. All routine flights, commercial and private, are filtered out. Those of special interest to air defense are shown as arrows. Yellow is the Strategic Air Command. Green is for special interest flights, such as President Johnson's plane. Orange is unknown. After they're identified, that color is changed. Red is hostile, a color used so far only in practice. All this and much more goes into the decisions that are made right here in this room. A 24-hour watch kept by men of the Air Force, Army, Navy, and Canada. They see everything that's in the sky. They have to. And one of them is Captain Gary Reese, an Air Force radar officer with the Air Defense Command. Is that right, Captain? You see everything that's up there?
Yes, that's right, Bill. With the characteristics of our present radar system, Any object which has reflective surfaces and which stays within our radar coverage, which is virtually every square foot of the United States, will be painted on our radar screens.
But how good are you, Captain? How large an object can you see?
If it is reflective, and let's say larger than a watermelon as a crude example, and within our radar coverage, we should paint it.
You talk about the reflective properties of an object in the sky. Is it possible, Captain, that there are things up there made of material your radar will not pick up?
So far as we know, all flying objects are composed of materials which are aerodynamic and which do have a reflective surface upon which radar waves can be bounced. It's possible that there are other types of material, however, I doubt it.
Has there ever been a report of a flying saucer, Captain, that was translated into hard information right here? A plot on the board in this room?
I don't think so, Bill, for the reason that these sightings have never been substantiated and could not be translated into hard radar return figures.
There have been sightings then, but they turned out to be other things, airplanes or balloons.
But never a saucer.
You see everything up to roughly 100,000 feet?
Yes, that's right, up to approximately 100,000 feet, at which point the space tracking network takes over.
The Space Tracking Network, also in Colorado Springs, is charged with tracking and logging every object that moves in space around the Earth, from 100,000 feet to 2,000 miles. Bill Stout asked Major Albert Morse just how good the surveillance is.
As an example of some of our precision, we have here a photo of an object re-entering the Earth's atmosphere. Through our programs, we were able to predict a precise time that this was going to happen and notified a particular agency who then went out with a camera and was able to obtain this photograph.
What altitude?
This is just entering the Earth's atmosphere somewhere around 400,000 feet.
In keeping track on this board, you follow not only ours, but Russian, Canadian, French?
Yes, sir. Everything that has been launched so far.
Could there be objects in the heavens that you cannot see?
Yes, sir, there possibly could be. However, if they do have a reflectivity to a radar and obey the physical properties, these can be tracked by our system.
How far out can you see, and how small an object could you see?
Well, our general limits are a 1 square meter target at approximately 2,000 nautical miles.
If radar has not picked up any UFOs, what then of the argument that they are not made of earthly material sensitive to radar reflections? Well, most saucer sightings report bright lights, which should be picked up by cameras and light-sensitive film. The Smithsonian Astrophysical Observatory has a network of 16 automatic camera stations in the Midwestern United States that covers approximately 300,000 square miles of sky. We asked Dr. Robert McCroskey, director of SAO's Prairie Meteorite Network, to show us how it works.
So this is a 1/6 model. The actual building is 6 feet by 6 feet. It has in it 4 cameras which peer through the windows in the roof. These are aerial mapping cameras. They have 45 degrees from center to corner. Between the 4 cameras, they cover essentially the entire sky above 10 degrees elevation. The station is operated automatically. It is turned on at nightfall by these light sensors and turned off again shortly before dawn. And during this time, it photographs continuously. The cameras hold about 6 weeks' supply of film. It's recovered each week and returned to us. The exposed portion is returned each week to us. We have a photograph here of an extremely bright object that occurred last November. You see the meteor stretched along a straight line. It is broken every 20th of a second by a shutter. The shutter breaks permit us to determine the velocity and then the orbit of the body. In the past 15 months, working during the nighttime, during clear nights, we have not photographed anything with cameras that cover essentially the entire sky that we did not understand.
Dr. McCroskey, does the Smithsonian have other networks that feed information into the whole system?
Yes, we have the satellite tracking network, which is 12 stations about the world. At each of these stations we have a large specialized camera for tracking satellites. This is a model of one of them here. In size, it's about 10 feet high. The aperture is 20 inches. It's f.8. This camera is built so that it is possible for it to track along the trajectory of a satellite and can, in fact, photograph a 6-inch shiny sphere at the distance of the moon.
At the distance of the moon?
Yes.
Could you show me a picture of something that's come from that kind of camera?
Yes, not a meteor photograph, but one of a satellite, in fact, 2 satellites. This is the Gemini rendezvous when the 2 Gemini capsules were within about 3 miles of each other.
But in all of the pictures that you've ever seen also from this type of device, again, nothing has ever shown up in any of them that somebody would call an unidentified flying object.
It's not that we would call an unidentified flying object, no.
Since there are no bogies on radar that can remain unknown for long, and there is no photographic evidence, let's go farther out. The expanding knowledge of what lies beyond our planet has made it respectable to speculate about the possibility of life elsewhere. But that knowledge also makes it more difficult to conceive of interstellar space vehicles. Instrumented space probes like Mariner, flying by Venus and taking pictures of the surface of Mars. Radar signals from Earth bounced off planetary surfaces and monitored on giant antennae like these have thus far tended to confirm that if there is life there at all, it is in elementary form, not the sort to construct UFOs for exploration of Earth. As for what lies beyond our planetary system, it's well to remember that our sun is a tiny star placed near the edge of our galaxy, the Milky Way. Each of these nebulae are composed of millions of suns which might have their own planetary systems where life at various stages of development might exist. But the nearest star, like our sun, is Proxima Centauri. It is 1,000,000 times farther away from Earth than the nearest planet. If it had planets around it and was inhabited by intelligent beings capable of travel through the galaxy, they would have to construct spaceships that traveled at 670 million miles per hour, the speed of light. A round trip from the vicinity of Proxima Centauri to Earth would take more than 8.5 years of Earth time. So those scientists who are inclined to think the universe may abound in intelligent life tend to believe that God's quarantine, as some of them call the distance which separates us, will make radio signals the ultimate form of communication, not spaceships. Great electronic ears have enabled man to listen for electromagnetic signals from the farthest objects in the universe that have so far been detected. This one, 1,000 feet in diameter, in Arecibo in Puerto Rico, is operated by Cornell University for the Advanced Research Projects Agency and is engaged in a number of deep space and planetary projects. If we are not alone in the universe, instruments like this, pursuing carefully programmed listening exercises, may one day bring us a fateful message. The astronomers have long been the leading theorists on the possibility of life in outer space. Astronomer Carl Sagan is consultant to a current Air Force scientific panel. Astronomer Thornton Page was on a CIA committee that investigated UFO reports in 1952. Its conclusion? No evidence of UFOs.
Our panel was expected to be, and I think was, objective in its approach and tried to evaluate all the reports without saying they're ridiculous in advance. That has been repeated quite recently, and that is a good reason for talking with Carl Sagan here, because he's in the same position that I was, being the only astronomer in a similar panel.
There's not a single verified or checked out report which is at all connectable with the possibility of extraterrestrial life. It doesn't say that I think extraterrestrial life is impossible. Quite the contrary. I think that many of the stars in the sky have planetary systems. We know enough now about the origin of life to make it appear likely that life arises naturally on the vast bulk of these planets. It's possible, but by no means certain, that life on many of these planets evolves into beings which are as advanced as we, or more advanced. And I don't see any reason why we can't imagine that there are civilizations thousands or millions of years in advance of ourselves, capable of technical feats that we can hardly imagine. If you would believe, as the flying saucer cultists would have us believe, that the majority of the saucer reports are due to visitations, then you have a very strange situation. That means several spaceships are coming to the Earth over interstellar distances every day, as if all the anthropologists in the world were to converge on one of the Andaman Islands in the Indian Ocean because they just invented the fishnet there or something. I think it's much more reasonable if you want to speculate on the possibility of extraterrestrial intelligence, that there are very rare visits from extraterrestrials to the Earth. There's no evidence for this. I just say that's not implausible. But to have several visits a day, I think, is straining credulity. I think a key to what's behind the real belief in flying saucers is most easily obtained if you look at the contact myths. There are several hundred people in the United States who claim to have had personal contact with the inhabitants of flying saucers who have landed. And if you examine these myths, you find that there are some peculiar regularities. The inhabitants of saucers are benevolent. I mean, they're really concerned for our well-being. They're omnipotent, extremely powerful, omniscient, extremely knowledgeable, and they often wear long white robes. Now, this combination is something I've heard in another context. This isn't science, this is religion. And what I suspect is happening is this. We live in very unsettled times. It used to be possible to believe in a personal, benevolent, powerful, all-knowing God who cared about individuals who you could pray to. But now, there's very few people who really believe that, I think. Science, for good or for ill, has destroyed a lot of the traditional theologies. And yet people have the same needs to believe that they always did, perhaps more so because of the times we live in. Well, the flying saucer myths are a really clever compromise. It's a way of having beings that come from the sky, that are worried about us, that are powerful, that are going to step in and prevent us from destroying ourselves, as we very well might, and yet have it in the cloak of science, so that no one can say nonsense that doesn't match science. It's all very pseudo-scientific. I would think that at least for the contact myths, and probably for a lot of the events of people who just see things they don't understand flying overhead, that what's involved psychology and theology, and not so much the physical sciences.
So, as we have seen, scientists think the evidence is mounting that life in some form exists elsewhere in the universe. But almost unanimously, they find no evidence that anything out there has come here. One thing is clear. You could not keep a spaceship a secret. Too many professionals with too many powerful instruments are probing the skies these days. And too many journalists could not be restrained from trumpeting one of the greatest news stories of all time. It also seems clear that since the security of our world is involved in converting all UFOs immediately into IFOs, perhaps these phenomena are properly the responsibility of scientists and the military, with periodic reports to the public on what they have found, if anything. The rest of us can emulate the scientists by keeping an open mind, since yesterday's fantasy sometimes turns into tomorrow's reality. But we might remember, too, that while fantasy improves science fiction, science is more often served by facts. This is Walter Cronkite for CBS Reports. Good night.
CBS Reports, UFO, Friend, Foe, or Fantasy, has been brought to you by International Business Machines, IBM. CBS Reports, UFO, Friend, Foe, or Fantasy, was filmed and edited by the staff of CBS Reports under the supervision and control of CBS News. telescopic film of the galaxies, courtesy of California Institute of Technology and Carnegie Institution of Washington, D.C.